Current research projects in the last couple of years include work in the Great Lakes Basin, a couple of important accords there signed in 2005. The Great Lakes have been the subject of over 100 years of cooperative international and interstate work, and we were looking at some of the most recent work done there on conservation initiatives and how citizens became involved in shaping the outcomes. The Columbia River Basin in 2014, the Canada, the US, the states in the Northwest, they're in the Columbia River Basin, concluded a multi-year, multi-stakeholder consultation process to examine a 1964 treaty. The 1964 treaty was focused on essentially financing the development of dams in Canada, and a couple of them in the US, in order to provide flood control and electricity for the US Northwest. So it was basically like a financing scheme: dam the rivers of the Columbia Basin in Canada, ship the water down as called upon, and the water can be used to produce power, but also because of the dams, well, flood control, although the Army Corps of Engineers, since Katrina, no longer calls it flood control, they call it flood management. So that's a 1964 perspective. Well, since then, a few other things have become apparent. The environment's important. Indigenous populations in the Northwest, their voice has been more readily heard. So a 40-year-old, 50-year-old treaty needed to be updated. And because of public involvement, because of public engagement in this inter-sovereign process, environmental or ecosystem concerns have been brought to the table and will be dialed into future relationships under that treaty. The final work I want to talk about, and will be the focus of my remaining 6.5 minutes here, is the work I'm doing in the Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri River Basin. I know those of you who are geographers are going to tell me, well, you've forgotten the Arkansas, the Black, and this, but most people just call it the Mississippi River Basin. The problem with that is we think of the main stem states. Most of us here in Indiana don't think of ourselves as being Gulf of Mexico citizens. We are. As illustrated by my remarks or my questions earlier, we are all part of the Gulf of Mexico system. We're all part of the Mississippi River system. What we do in Indiana, with a small exception up along Lake Michigan, flows southward, south by southwest, and ends up in the Gulf, along with many other states. And so I have been referring to it as the Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri, or the MISOMO Basin, just to make the point that the Ohio and the Missouri and the citizens along in those sub-basins are critical. I want to talk about that project a little bit in some of my initial observations. My research objectives at the macro level are to basically ask the question about watershed initiatives. What are the challenges? What are the institutions being developed to address those challenges? How do citizens of Indianapolis see ourselves as part of the Mississippi River Basin? How do we behave? How do we make choices about what soap to use, about what food to purchase, about whether or not to use Teflon-coated cookware that may have an impact on that system. These are big issues, and it's a big challenge. But in essence, that's what I've done for a number of years, is sort of international and transboundary work, and so that's the essence of this project. I'm also taking some time to look at the micro level at community relationships to the water. So at the macro level, as I said, it's a very broad focus. I want to look at the basin as a complete system. There is no current single institutional framework for cooperation at a basin level. You could say the same of the Chesapeake Bay. You could say the same of the Colorado River. You can't say that of the Mississippi. Why? Historically, too big, too complex, too many issues, but there's no single institutional framework, and part of my effort is to assess the needs for such a framework and make some recommendations about it. This is all very preliminary. I am on sabbatical in the fall, so and I'll be spending my sabbatical at Washington University in St. Louis and at Tulane in New Orleans. Between St. Louis and New Orleans, hopefully, as I was saying earlier, I can talk my dean into funding a riverboat trip up and down as I move between the cities. I promise to share any winnings. with the school. So far, he's not taking that offer. We'll see. Maybe he knows I'm a bad gambler. In any event, the point is, it's all very preliminary, but I'm focusing on the entire basin at a macro level. At a micro level, I've been focusing on two small rivers. One, the Blue River in Indiana on the left. I took some students there last summer to do some research, to do some peer-to-peer learning. I actually ran a 2-credit course, part of which was taught on the river in canoes, where the students working in small teams co-taught each other. They each picked an area of research: ecosystem, water quality, community sociological relationships. This is a law school. I'm a law professor, so it all comes back to how does law influence or get in the way or promote these concerns. But the focus of the Blue River in Indiana, the Jacks Fork in Missouri, and as you can see, the Blue River is a little green. It's hypernutrification, basically. Anyway, the preliminary data. It's a big river. It moves a lot of sediment each day. It's the home to multiple species. The challenges. Continuing problems the National Park Service notes with bacteria, phosphorus, nitrogen, sedimentation. In 2008, the National Research Council large study said the Mississippi River Basin is an orphan in terms of assessment of quality. It remains an orphan. The legal frameworks, I'll spare you the details. The emerging institutions, as I said, none of them basin-wide. The preliminary view down the river, for me, threatened ecosystems, threatened species. That bird's trying hard to get a drink, isn't he? River otter, hellbender salamander, threatened economies, threatened communities, threatened lives. Why the threat? I just don't think we look far enough downriver. We don't see ourselves as part of the system. We're focused on our own front yards, and we forget that we're all, rather that life is dependent on water, and that we all live downstream.